Maverick News, the antivirus program for your mind. And now, the Freedom Reporters.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rick Walker. You're watching Maverick News. I am one of the Freedom Reporters, and I am flying solo again tonight. It is Sunday evening, and we have a lot of stuff to share with you tonight, a lot of stuff on tap. But first, the first thing I'd like to do is take you straight to a live feed with an update on what is going on with the People's Convoy, which was at the Hagerstown Speedway as a sort of a final staging location. They arrived there yesterday and overnight, and they got things organized. There were speeches, and today they left the Speedway around 9:30 this morning, and they did a couple of slow roll laps around the Beltway of Washington, D.C., and this is the scene back at the Speedway tonight. And they were in contact with authorities there and sort of negotiated a plan of action for the People's Convoy so that they would not run afoul of the law. They've been trying to keep this thing entirely lawful and, of course, peaceful as well. And that is exactly what we've seen so far. And there's been an outpouring of patriotism. Let's just open this up and just listen to what's going on. Take a quick look.
At the price of gas, I need every bit.
Yeah, I was sitting there telling everybody how proud I was that guy. I met him a couple days ago.
And there is food there. Donations have been pouring in. Monetary donations mostly, and all of that money is being used for fuel and for food for the truckers and those who are there supporting the People's Convoy. Of course, they're protesting the medical mandates. They want them all lifted, and that is the main thrust of what is going on. This convoy inspired, of course, by what happened in Ottawa and by the convoys that rolled across Canada. Ultimately resulting in a successful protest by most standards, I would say, in Ottawa that lasted over 3 weeks. It was an unprecedented event, and across Canada, it was also an outpouring of national pride and love of country. Justin Trudeau's Liberal government, of course, was worried about it, opposed to it, and in the end, sent in armed police officers acting in a very violent way to break up the protest there, which consisted of bouncy castles, dancing in the streets, speeches, music, a lot of Canadian flag waving. And as I say, this is the scene at Hagerstown Speedway tonight. We do have some footage. We do have some footage of what the convoy looked like as it made its way around the Beltway. So let's dump out of this and show you some of that footage from earlier today. This footage shot from an elevated position on an overpass. In a moment, it'll switch over to show you the actual trucks. The word we have is that there were well over 1,000 trucks participating in the slow roll along the Beltway. The convoy causing some traffic disruption there. But overall, it was a peaceful event. Some mild confrontations, apparently, between some frustrated motorists, people opposed to the convoy, and the truckers. Also coming up tonight, we have a speech from Justin Trudeau, Canada's Prime Minister, delivered to members of the Ukrainian community in Etobicoke. And we're going to roll that speech for you tonight. And I think it's an important speech to listen to because in the middle of the speech, he uses sort of twisted, upside down, backward language. And he's become very good at it. And in fact, it's the kind of doublespeak, Orwellian doublespeak, that they've been employing for quite a long time, especially during the pandemic. And this doublespeak that he employs makes reference to authoritarian figures, and it also makes reference to, in an indirect way, to censorship. And it's a very interesting way that he has used his words, and it is in itself a form of propaganda that most people will not pick up on. And we're going to expose that for you tonight. We'll just dump out of that momentarily and see if we can get to the good stuff. Here we go. So there you go. There was a police escort leading the truckers around the Beltway. As you saw there, those police cruisers up front. And this was the scene earlier today as the truckers began their first lap around the Beltway. So the question is, will this be effective? The strategy outlined, laid out, yes, yeah, that's right. This is the one where he talks about a slight slippage in democracy. That's referring to Justin Trudeau's speech. We will get to that shortly. And when I became aware of this, when I heard what he had to say, it blew my mind. Yes. So the question is, will this People's Convoy be effective? Is there enough leverage here? The strategy right now is that they say they are not actually going into Washington, D.C. They don't want a repeat of what happened in Ottawa, where police were brought in and used riot control tactics and heavy-handed military tactics to disperse and later hunt down and punish the truckers. So right now they're making their presence known. And it's my understanding that there are many other trucks still on the road and heading into the area to join the People's Convoy. And there is actually more than one group. And today we saw fuel prices take another jump upwards. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Another spike in fuel prices, which honestly, in my view, never had to happen, never should happen. I don't think there's any reason people living in Canada and the United States should be paying the kind of prices that we are being forced to pay for gasoline, natural gas, etc. It's fuel prices are ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. So that was the scene as the trucks began to make their way around the Beltway today. That was on I-70. And let's go back to the live stream here for a moment. Back at the Hagerstown Speedway, where they have now returned from their laps around the Beltway today.
Been standing for freedom, and we're trying to send out an SOS to the Americans because Canada is a tyrannical mess right now. Our Prime Minister says that we
That's
are
Laura Lynn.
with unacceptable views, and they are now currently firing people who do not get the jab. The doctors are being forced to get the jab, and it's just been a real loss of freedom. Kids can't go to universities if they don't have the jab. And so while a lot of places are dropping the mandates, Canada, our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, here's Canada right here, our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is an absolute tyrant, and he needs to be dealt with crimes against humanity. So we broadcast, we go live on 8 platforms every day. So we're down here. I saw you were broadcasting, and I thought that was wonderful. So who are you? Sasna.
See the cab over coming in right now?
Yes.
Right behind it, there's a white truck, and I have the big
That's
logo on it.
fantastic.
I'm just an old truck driver, and I have a YouTube channel, and I thought, well, I got to riding with them. I thought, well, they need a voice.
Wow.
Nobody's talking about it on the radio, on the phone.
So there we see Laura Lynn, and she is, of course, a pretty prominent independent journalist, YouTuber, streamer, and she's down there connecting with one of the streamers on site at Hagerstown Speedway. Laura Lynn kind of explaining the Canadian perspective.
Extreme political controversy, so-and-so must.
Yeah, Tim Kidd says gas in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada is at $1.85 a liter. That's $7.01 for a gallon of gasoline right now. And in Montreal, here, let's just pull up the audio on this again.
You know, like we really believe in freedom in Canada, and our Canadian rights are absolutely being bludgeoned right now. It's a mess. We're sending out an S counts. Yes, just because of supporting somebody who wasn't even in the convoy would give $20 or whatever. They froze the accounts, and they froze business accounts, personal accounts. They froze credit cards and caused the credit ratings to fall for certain people. All because what? Because we stood for freedom, and nobody's listening.
All because you had a different opinion than they
A
did.
different opinion, and we just have we definitely value freedom. We know that some people want to get, a shot and some people do not. And if we do not, I personally have already had COVID, so have most Canadians by now. So we're all natural immunity is flowing, and so it's just been really difficult. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, America. We're here to stand. My name is Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson, lauralynn.tv, LAURALYNN.tv. And we cover everything
That's a
that's
lot.
going on. I know.
I have a lady, she's like a secretary for me back home, and she's writing all this stuff. So slower, say that again. So she has time.
LauraLynn.tv, LauraLynn.tv. And I'm going to tell all my Canadian folks, and I'm hoping I can get an interview with you as well.
Sure.
Maybe tomorrow.
Be around.
Will you be around?
I'm hard to find.
Yeah. Are you?
I'm hard to find.
Times. You got your hat on.
Yeah, in Texas, I got to blend in with everybody, but around here, I stand out. So.
Oh, I am so honored. I saw you, interviewing a bunch of
So there's Laura Lynn.
down here.
And
so many Canadian flags. I believe that this is a way that
That's
God
interesting.
has united Canada.
Tim Kidd says Laura Lynn rants too. Yeah, and stick around. The night is young. You never know when I might
This global agenda.
flow into one of my
It is. And Klaus Schwab has said that
One
our
of my
Prime Minister is
infamous
is
rants.
one of his. And he said it out loud. And so I think that there's a track to just follow a certain kind of, initiative, and we're not on board with it because we believe in the sovereignty and autonomy that God gave us in our bodies. And we're just grateful that the Lord's giving us opportunity to join with Americans because we're stronger together if we can find a way. But some of us are actually needing asylum. There's all kinds of very skilled people, doctors, dentists in British Columbia, where I'm from, and that's on the West Coast, just above California. On the West Coast, dentists and physiotherapists are being ordered that they have to get the jab by March 24th or they lose their jobs. This is not the free world. It's so unfair to do this. So everyone's screaming blue murder, and I'm here sending out an SOS to whoever would listen that Canada and the USA needs to stand together. Isn't that so beautiful? And the Canadian flags, it's just beautiful. And the Canadian flags that I see on all of the truckers, I just want to say it's an honor and a privilege to be here and to be here supporting now the convoy. So I came across the border. My husband and I are U.S. dual citizens with Canada and the U.S.
That was going to be a question I was going to have. How did you?
How did we get across?
Hard to do that or anything?
Do you know what? So another guy that was in Ottawa in the convoy, unvaccinated, he entered. He crossed the. Everyone should know this. He crossed the border over on the Ontario side. No vaccine, no antigen, and the border crossing guard basically said, "Have a good trip."
Yes. Coming from America to Canada?
Coming from Canada to America.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. And we were shocked to hear that he had such an easy time of it. Probably a really good freedom fighter, border guard that understands the things that are going on. But Dr. Paul Alexander was up at our convoy in Ottawa. Dr. Paul Alexander has all of the latest. He's one of the most brilliant. If you talk about Dr. Peter McCullough and Dr. Corey is here as well. These doctors know the science. Let's follow the science and stop the nonsense. And Canada's in a real bad way right now because they've got a couple of pastors that are incarcerated, Pastor Art Pulowski, and they are treating him bad like a political prisoner. And he's from Poland originally, and he's still in jail, and they are holding him unlawfully, unconstitutionally, against our rights for just speaking the truth, so it's a mess.
Yeah, I don't know anything about this pastor.
Art Pulowski.
Yeah, I don't know anything about him.
Yes, sir.
Look
And we tour all through the States. He's on, Clay Clark is doing a, you don't know him? Okay. He's a great guy in America fighting for freedom. They're doing a big event in San Diego. And Pastor Art Pulowski is actually on his poster of all the freedom fighters.
So you know all these people because you're really into this. See,
yes.
I'm just no truck driver. And I come over and
Well, you were really,
I'm just no truck driver, and I'm driving around, and I just day to day, I see things here and see things there, and no, things aren't right. Things aren't the way they should be. You know? So when this started up, I'm like, I think I'll tag along with these guys. And then I realized nobody's talking, I start to get on the TV, try to find some stories about it. Nothing. Get on the internet, there's no stories, no nothing about it.
Happening.
So we get over here, and now we're still here. I was making fun of it. I was kind of poking at the news media.
Yeah.
We're driving down the highway heading to the Beltway today.
Yeah.
On the way down there, I'm looking, at that time I had 11,000 people on board. Driving along, and I'm like, it's kind of funny. A truck driver with a freaking iPhone is doing better news coverage than NBC, CBS, ABC, or Fox. And by the time we got down there around the bottom, went across the Potomac, it was about 16,000, I think, just almost 16, about 15.
Wow.
People
are just following a regular guy, and something's wrong, and that's where we in Canada do as well. We don't have the constitutional.
Canada's different than we are. I don't know. Is there a connection here because Britain and you guys are Commonwealth of Britain, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's Australia, and so is New Zealand, and so is who else? Others that are. But it seems like all of them are in the same kind of boat that Canada's in. And is there something?
We're not republics.
Huh?
We're not republics. So
Okay.
the prime minister is a de facto.
Okay.
Because the prime minister.
Do you mind?
Canada, anyway.
Do you mind?
No,
Sure. Okay.
In Canada, the prime minister is a de facto king because he leads the party in power.
Okay.
And he gets to decide who runs for the party. Whereas in the States, because it's Republic, the GOP or the Democrats don't control locally who runs for the representative for the House or the Senate.
Okay.
It's the people elect the person, and even if they don't like that person, the party is still represent the party. But in Canada, if the party doesn't like you, they will not approve your nomination to run for the party. So they very tightly control who runs for them. So they know going in that they will be voted for what the party wants. Whereas here, you can have Republicans disagree with the leadership, or Democrats disagree, like Manchin disagree with the Democratic leadership on the infrastructure bill or whatever.
Right.
And in Canada, that will not happen. That person will be kicked out of the party. Here, you can't really kick somebody out of the GOP or the Democrats. In Canada, parties often kick people out of the party, and they say independence, which is hard to win as independence. So the next election cycle, that person is usually gone, and the person replacement party approves who that person is to run.
We have Republicans and Democrats, and we have the Green Party, the Independent Party,
Libertarians.
Libertarians, and all that. What do you have in Canada? What do they call them?
Everything in Canada is a little bit left. Almost even the Conservatives are where almost the Democrats are here. So
Right.
the Liberals are left of the Democrats here.
Yeah.
If you can believe it.
The Republicans.
The Liberals here, the Liberals in Canada are left of where the Democrats are here.
Okay.
So
And then
conservatives
what's your
are-
Conservative Party called?
It's the Conservative Party of Canada, CPC.
Okay.
And they're just liberal light.
They're almost where the Democrats are.
That's like
they're
Rhino-
all
kind of
supporting-
like Rhino is down here.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're all rhinos.
Paris
basically.
Accord, they're all went for the Paris Accord and all that, which limit our ability to, the energy we can use, which provides our obviously the Biden administration. And then you have the NDP, which is called the New Democratic Party, so that's an ironic name because they are super far left of the Liberals.
Okay.
And then you have the Green
So that's what's going on down there. That was Laura Lynn
Green Party.
speaking. This gentleman here, honestly, some of what he's saying is accurate. Some of what he's saying is not quite accurate. Canada's prime minister is not a de facto king. That's not an accurate assessment at all. The system obviously is parliamentary. It's not the same as the system in place in the United States, but we don't have a de facto king. That's why we still have the Queen.
So Maxime Bernier is a new leader. He left the Conservatives because the Conservatives were too corrupt to actually be reformed, in his opinion. So he's really a maverick, and he's coming out of the gate, and he's standing very, very strong.
Laura Lynn talking about
we've got
Maxime
mainstream
Bernier and the
media
People's
that
Party
won't
of
report the
Canada.
truth on anything. Seriously, like
Same down here. Same
Yep.
getting out
At
here.
least you have Fox News. At least you have the God bless him, Tucker Carlson, and some of these guys. I just love them. They tell the truth. But we do not have that in Canada. So what we have is independent producers, and that's us. That's me. And so I've got a pretty good following. We've had 7,000, but not every day.
Okay.
But
Now they're
it's
trying to
open.
bring C11
Yeah.
in.
Right. Now they're trying to bring in Bill C11. C11 in Canada is going to control what independent producers say. Look into their money, make it real hard to tell the truth. They want total control on everything. Prime Minister Trudeau, he loves the way China does things. So basically, we are in a real crisis, and I'm very sad. I'm sad for my children. I have 2 grandchildren. They're really desperately in need of being protected from our own nation, and it's very sad. It's very sad for us. If you do not agree with your party, you are kicked out. So our Conservative parties, while we may have elected some good people with our values, they don't get a say because the party will silence them or get rid of them, as they have done to a good man named Randy Hillier. He's an MPP, so it would be similar to a state representative, yeah, in a smaller county or something like that, if you had that. So Randy Hillier, he spoke the truth. He talked about the COVID narrative. He talked about like what's going on and
Thank you,
all
Barry.
the loss of our freedoms. And what did they do? Silenced him. Even though he was an elected person, this last week he's not going to run again because they have told him he's censored. He may not speak in the House. So it's corrupt. Our judges and judicial system will not stand for supporting the people or supporting science. They will only go along with the narrative. Dr. Bonnie Henry in our British Columbia, she is a wicked medical person. She's
She's your Fauci.
Official health
She's our-
officer, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Our Fauci would be Dr. Teresa Tam. Dr. Teresa Tam is a real crazy person. They outlawed any
Yeah.
treatment of early treatment for things, and I won't say it on your feet. And she has basically been
Yeah, Dr. Teresa Tam, a real crazy person. That's one way to describe her, I guess. Roy Patterson says, after talking to a couple of truckers I know who was going to the convoy, when he found out they were not going to block the Capitol, they told me this rolling around the Capitol will do nothing. You know, Roy, I kind of wonder myself. In a way, you have a point. And here's why. If I tend to agree, it's going to be very difficult for them to achieve much or get government to bend to their will.
Medical people,
Because you have to compare this, I think, to a labor dispute or a strike. And if workers at a factory go on strike, they set up a picket line outside the factory. The idea is, of course, to withhold their labor to prevent the owners of the company from producing, and that costs them money. They're blocking access at that point to private property, correct? Yes. Is that unlawful? That's arguable, but precedents have been set for picket lines to be set up like that. And the reason the picket lines remain in place is to prevent scab labor or replacement workers from being hired and brought in. That gives the workers leverage over the employer and the company. These truckers, yeah, they're rolling around, they're driving, making their presence known. Maybe they can generate more public support that way. But for 2 years, we saw a lot of protests across Canada. We're still seeing them now. And for over 2 years, those protests achieved very little, if anything, in my view. People marching around with Bristol board signs, expressing their displeasure with lockdowns, at times being arrested and ticketed to the tune of even $100,000. All of those things now clogging up the court system. So the government really cracked down on people who were protesting in that manner. And those protests really achieved almost nothing. It wasn't until the truckers rolled into Ottawa and caused some major disruption around the Capitol. And it happened en masse in large numbers and inspired other protests and blockades, that's when the government sat up and took notice. Now, I'm not advocating or telling anyone what to do. I'm just commenting, observing, and providing, I guess, a little bit of analysis based on my years of experience as a field reporter covering labor disputes, labor issues, and even blockades in the past, where I covered the blockades in the late 80s and early 90s involving truckers at the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor. Those protests, blockades back in at that time were focused on the free trade issue and the loss of jobs and trucking jobs in particular. So it was the disruption, the inconvenience that it caused for commerce, for business, for even everyday Canadian citizens that really made the politicians sit up and take notice and respond. And they have. We didn't start to see these mandates fall until the truckers started to roll and until they set up their demonstration in Ottawa. Now, the government can call it what they want, and they chose to call it an occupation, an insurrection. It was pretty clear they wanted this thing to manifest into something resembling a January 6th style event that we saw unfold in the United States. They didn't really get that, did they? No. They got a bunch of peaceful protesters and a huge outpouring of patriotism. But then they unleashed their mainstream media mouthpieces and spun up a narrative that was clearly false, clearly fabricated, and they continue to use language and words like occupation, insurrection, illegal occupation, illegal protest, so-called freedom convoy. They keep throwing so-called in front of it to discredit them. They smeared the truckers as Nazis, fascists.
Well, we've had churches burned in Canada, like 40 some odd churches burned last year in Canada. We've had statues toppled.
And they continue to try to spin this narrative. But it was because of the truckers. We all know it. It was because of what the truckers did down there that we're seeing these measures relaxed now. So will this be successful in the United States? Where's the leverage? If all you're going to do is camp out and once a day go do a couple of laps around the Capitol, but not really disrupt much, I don't know if that achieves anything. Because even though the government doesn't really want people protesting, even though Justin Trudeau in Canada doesn't want protests, and will crack down on them to some degree, as long as they're small, spread out, short in duration, I don't think they care that much, because they're the kinds of protests that they can just sort of ignore. They don't really affect anyone. There's no disruption. And there's really not much of an impact. So yeah, Roy, I hear exactly what you're saying, and I understand what those truckers are saying as well. So we saw in the speeches last night where they said, we're going to stay here until we get what we want. But if all you're doing is camping out at a speedway, if that's all you're doing, and I have to be honest with you folks, I want to be optimistic and I want to be supportive of constructive things, but if all you're going to do is camp out at a speedway, does Joe Biden care? Do the politicians who control these mandates and decide whether they stay in place or not, do they really care? Does it affect anyone? You might as well go camp at a KOA campground and say, we're going to stay here until we get what we want. Where's the leverage? Where's your picket line?
What do you do?
I don't see how that has much impact. Now in Canada, the government kind of seems to make up new laws as they go along in order to combat things like the Freedom Convoy that they had to deal with. And ultimately, in order to do kind of an end run around people's constitutional rights and the rights under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada, Justin Trudeau brought in the Emergencies Act, which is the modern equivalent or the replacement legislation for the War Measures Act. And that really gave him the ability to just suspend people's rights and impose a form of martial law on the country.
Donate to go to People's Convoy.
So
Donate there.
So what can I say? I just wonder where the leverage is. The government, and the point that I'm making is there is legal precedent for protests that are disruptive. It's part of living in a democratic, free society. Protesting is a right, and sometimes those protests touch the edges of law. One of the reasons the whole thing in Ottawa became so out of control is because of the way the government handled it. It wasn't the truckers or the protesters. It was the government response to it. The decision to bring in goons, turn police into a paramilitary force, and bring them in to crack down on the protesters and do it in a coercive, violent way, beating them up, hitting them with batons, shooting them with rubber bullets, using tear gas, bringing in the LRAD device, long-range acoustic device, which bombards them with high-intensity sonic waves, ear-piercing sounds. If you get hit with that thing directly, it can blow out your eardrums. It's controversial. I begged them not to use it here on the broadcast. And that's how they ended up dealing with it. But I guess the point is, in my view, and in the view of the judge who passed the directive to force the truckers to stop honking their horns, even that judge said that the protest was lawful. And there are legal challenges still before the courts to sort of address this issue over whether this protest was lawful or not that we saw in Ottawa. Well, sometimes protests touch the edges of laws. And in Ottawa, we saw, traffic violations. We saw trucks parked, I guess, illegally on the street. So these were the things that they were throwing at them as charges. And that's why Tamara Litch and Pat King remain in custody, and the charges they're facing. And the charges, as far as I know, any of the charges laid have been pretty much restricted to mischief or counseling to commit mischief. And that's about the extent of it. That's the height of the seriousness surrounding this, right? And yet the government used traffic violations, Highway Traffic Act violations, city bylaw violations as an excuse to impose the Emergencies Act, as an excuse to seize bank accounts and money from crowdsourcing platforms like GiveSendGo and GoFundMe. I mean, that the whole government response to this thing was ridiculous. It continues to be ridiculous. They're looking they're looking for a prison sentence for Pat King and Tamara Litch of 10 years. The punishment hardly fits the crime, if a crime was even committed. Absolutely ridiculous. I should say, as before we move on here, yeah, Tamara Litch was the Freedom Convoy leader. That's right. Well, she headed up the fundraising effort, right? First $10 million raised through GoFundMe, frozen by the government. Then, I guess arrangements are being made, and it's already started where the money is being refunded to the people who donated. Then Give, Send, Go. The government's trying to go after that, but it's still safely, apparently, in a bank account in the United States. And I should say, make sure you go check out Laura Lynn's channel. She's well worth watching, and check out the streamers that have been sending out their feeds. Support them, and of course, you can also support us here on our channel at freedomreporters.com. You can donate to us at freedomreporters.com, or you can click the link in the YouTube description or on the Facebook description. And we are also now live streaming on Rumble for the first time as of tonight. Our new Rumble channel, our new Maverick News channel on Rumble is set up and operating. So that is a bonus, and that will allow us to take some content over there that we are not able to share with you over here on the Facebook and YouTube platforms. In particular, we have some content that we're eager to share with you regarding the release of those Pfizer documents earlier this week. We've been going through those, and new information is coming out that we'd like to share with you, but we just can't do that here on YouTube because, of course, if you say very much at all over here, the channel will be banned. And we've already had some warnings on this channel. On these channels, we have more than one on YouTube. And please like and subscribe if you can. That also helps us out a great deal. If you can't donate to us, you can still support us by liking and subscribing and checking us out now on Rumble as well and subscribing over there. That'll help us grow and provide more of this kind of content. It does. There are costs associated with providing these broadcasts, and from all of us here at Maverick News, we greatly appreciate the support we have had so far, with more of it to come. Now, I did refer to the Emergencies Act, the use of it, as Justin Trudeau's way of imposing a form of martial law. And I did receive an email message that I'd like to address tonight briefly. I guess I don't know. It's, I've been getting a lot of different messages from people. Most of it very positive and helpful. This one came from Sam McClone. He says, if anyone actually wants to understand the meaning of the words martial law, there are plenty of 4 and 10-minute videos to explain it. Then you could develop informed opinions and share them in conversation without appearing foolish in the eyes of those observing. Okay, well, fair enough, Sam, I guess, except that I stand by my use of the phrase martial law. I think I do understand the meaning of it, and my use of it last night and again tonight has been appropriate. I will look up a definition of martial law for you right now, in fact. Martial law, according to Wikipedia, is the temporary imposition of direct military control of normal civil functions or suspension of civil law by a government, especially in response to a temporary emergency where civil forces are overwhelmed or in an occupied territory. Well, that would certainly fall directly in line with the use of the Emergencies Act, wouldn't it? Which is what Justin Trudeau did, or the War Measures Act. That's what it used to be called. The legislation was just rewritten a little bit, and its scope broadened to include more emergency situations, and the name was changed to make it more palatable to the public whenever the government might have chosen to implement it or invoke it, and that's exactly what he did in response to a bunch of truckers who went to Ottawa and set up bouncy castles for kids basically set up something that resulted in a carnival type atmosphere where they gave out free food to anybody that wanted it, including the homeless, who had never been so well fed from what I saw and heard about from people on the ground there. Flag waving. We showed you for over 3 weeks exactly what it was all about. And yet the government chose to impose the Emergencies Act. Well, the other issue here for me is that people like Sam, I think, are the ones who don't really understand where we're at and how serious the decision to invoke the Emergencies Act was. Sam obviously feels that it wasn't a very big deal and that I'm using the phrase martial law loosely, but I'm not. The decision to do that was unprecedented and did not even come close to meeting the threshold necessary to actually invoke it. And that's why ultimately, when it ended up in front of the Senate, because he was able to invoke it and use it for about a week, but then the Senate, first Parliament had to vote on it, and they approved it because everybody voted along party lines. But that kind of legislation always goes to the Senate for what is referred to as, what I was always taught in school, it's a house where they can provide a degree or a line of sober second thought to legislation. And usually legislation is just rubber stamped by the Senate. But this was an extremely serious matter. And when the Senate looked at this, it became apparent that they were not just going to rubber stamp it. They began to ask questions. And we ran a story showing how at least one of the main reasons, I think, behind the Senate's decision, or what was going to be the Senate's decision to not push this thing through, we showed you how ridiculous it was. And it was because it was all based on a joke about a fake country that had been created by an online comedian who they said was a terrorist. It's not even true. And I think that's why they refused to show the senators the intelligence that they had on this, and also why they won't show that intelligence to the Canadian people. But the senators became aware of that story. And that's one of the main reasons they chose to, well, it was pretty clear they weren't going to approve the ongoing use of the Emergencies Act in Canada. But the point I was trying to make, and I'll come back to this, people like Canadians in general, people like Sam McClone, who sent me that message, they don't understand the seriousness of what happened and how close we came to having martial law imposed on people over an extended period of time. And yes, we are facing martial law, have been facing martial law in Canada for an extended period of time. That's what's been going on. If you're not vaccinated, you can't leave the country. I don't know how Laura Lynn got out of the country. Maybe she's vaccinated, maybe she's not. Her vaccination status is her business. But I know that if you're not vaccinated, you can't leave Canada right now. You can't go to the States. You can't fly in a plane. That's a form of martial law. People were locked down in their houses for an extended period of time. When the Emergency Act was invoked, your charter rights were no longer in play. Justin Trudeau stood there and said that he was protecting your rights by invoking the Emergencies Act, and nothing could have been further from the truth. The reason you impose the Emergencies Act is so that you can suspend all of the people's rights, so that you can do whatever you feel is necessary to deal with an emergency or a war. That's why you need to suspend people's rights. You need to say there's a curfew. You have to stay home. And if you don't, it's off to the gulag with you, because we have an invading army on our shores. We're about to march down Main Street, so stay inside and stay safe. That's why you impose the Emergencies Act. That is a form of martial law. That is martial law. You invoke that act, you've got martial law. That's what it is. It fits the definition I just gave you. Canadians are so compliant that even when they've done that, a lot of them don't get it. They don't understand how serious that is. And now, as a result of him having invoked it, Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, she says, well, we're going to leave these new tools that we also created to add on to the Emergencies Act that gave them the ability to freeze bank accounts and go after crowdfunding platforms and even target cryptocurrencies. Those financial tools, financial weapons, remain in place. And these are tools that the government was using to go after essentially political opponents. It was an abuse of the act, of the Emergencies Act. It was an abuse of power. The government using the War Measures Act as a tool to target political opponents, truckers, who they saw as their political opponent, and still do, to the degree where they're characterizing them as terrorists. It was a declaration of war on truckers. Justin Trudeau declared war on a large number of his own Canadian citizens, on his own people. Absolutely ridiculous. A totally inappropriate use of that power. And for Sam to say that I need to educate myself by watching a couple of YouTube videos about what martial law really is, it's very clear what martial law is, and we've been living through it, especially in places like Quebec, where they had curfews, lockdowns, which we'll talk about more tonight. Absolutely ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. Now, I think we should check in just briefly on the live feeds that we have coming out of Ukraine. Just take a quick look there. And then we're going to move on to the Justin Trudeau video, which I think you'll find disturbing when you really start to dissect what he had to say during a visit to Etobicoke, where he spoke to members of the Ukrainian community. And it wasn't really so much what he said about the situation in Ukraine. It was some language that he used that was sort of like Orwellian doublespeak. I'm just going to get that queued up. I'm just going to pull myself off this feed. I'll leave this up for just a moment while I do that. I'm going to need here about 60 seconds to get this set up for you. Just one moment. So this again is these are the live feeds coming out of Ukraine tonight. And from what we're seeing here, no explosions again. But the situation, as we understand it, is not exactly what the mainstream media has been reporting. The Russian military has been moving across Ukraine in a very methodical way. We saw a video today of Russian troops handing out food to Ukrainian citizens. Many others are still trying to get out of the country, of course, as we've seen. The propaganda has been ramped up on both sides, and so too has the censorship. And that's really what we're going to address here by showing you this speech that Justin Trudeau made during a stop in Etobicoke. So let's get to that. And when we're watching this, really listen to the words that he chooses. It's very important that you do. And when we get to about the middle of this address, where he's talking about authoritarian leaders and the erosion and the slippage of democracy, I think it's very important that you pay very close to his words. And we're going to dissect especially that part of what he has to say. This is about a 10-minute speech. I want to let the whole thing run because I think it's important that everyone has full context on this, not just an edited clip. I don't want to be accused of taking anything he says out of context. I want you to hear the whole 10-minute speech. So let's let this thing roll, and we'll do it right now.
Maloney from Etobicoke Lakeshore. Arif Irani from Parkdale High Park. Peter Fonseca from Mississauga East Cooksville. And I'm looking for Kirsty Duncan from Etobicoke North. Where's Kirsty? There she is. So I just wanted to say a few brief words and then I'll pass it over to the Prime Minister if I may. Last week, Vladimir Putin started an unprovoked full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And I think the Ukrainian people have fought incredibly courageously with great resilience, and I think that has inspired Canadians and it's inspired people around the world. This is, of course, a threat to Ukraine's sovereignty as the Russian military continues to advance. It's a humanitarian crisis with the Russian military shelling civilian positions, hospitals, apartment buildings, kindergartens, a nuclear power plant yesterday. But it's more than that, it's a threat to our global security. And so those Ukrainians who are fighting so courageously are not just fighting for their own freedom in their own homeland, but they're also fighting for all of us. And that is why it's so important that we fight for them. I can tell you that the MPs in the room, many MPs outside this room, have been fighting for them. And we've spoken many times with the Prime Minister, many times with Minister Anand, to advocate, to offer suggestions as to what Canada can do, along with our partners internationally. But the person who's been fighting and who's been leading that fight is Prime Minister Trudeau. And whether that's military support, I think all of you know about that, the lethal and non-lethal resources and other materials that we've provided to the Ukrainian military. Of course, the economic sanctions that have crushing economic sanctions really against Vladimir Putin and his regime and people around him and the central bank and much more. And of course, well over $100 million in humanitarian aid because there's millions of Ukrainians who are suffering. So, Prime Minister, I wanted to thank you for fighting. I wanted to thank you for your leadership. And I wanted to thank you for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. And I just want to start by thanking you once again for being such an extraordinary voice in our caucus, in our team, but also just in Parliament and in Canada, carrying the voice of Ukrainians through this. I first want to say I can't imagine what you and the entire community are going through right now. The mix of emotions, obviously a deep sense of sadness that this has come to this, rage that this is happening, mixed in with perhaps a little bit of pride that the entire world gets to see just how strong and courageous and resilient Ukrainians are, but such a deep sorrow that it had to come to this. What is happening is an incredible tragedy. Tragedy for the Ukrainian community, tragedy for Ukrainians all around the world, but also a tragedy for the world. And it was very much something that we didn't want to see happen, something that the world has been warned since Crimea. Since Crimea, Canada stepped up with Operation Unifier to help train up the Ukrainian military that is right now fighting like lions. We can give thanks to the Canadian armed forces who were there to help give them the tools to show the world what they're made of. The Canadian diaspora over the years has been connecting and building such deeper ties between Canada and Ukraine, whether it's the Canada-Ukraine free trade deal, whether it's increasing economic or cultural partnerships. Every year on the House of, in Parliament, the Ukrainian interns are everywhere, and an incredible sign of not just the connection, but the work we're doing together to build a better democracy, a better country, a better path forward in Ukraine, done by Ukrainians themselves. And the success of Ukraine over the past years in building this extraordinary country, this strength of pathway that is impressive, well, that was a direct threat to Vladimir Putin's view of authoritarian and Russian dominance. And we've come to a moment that, quite frankly, we've seen coming over the past years. And we've talked about it in the news, not just about Ukraine, but about democracies around the world, that we see a bit of a slippage in our democracies. Countries turning towards slightly more authoritarian leaders. Countries allowing increasing misinformation and disinformation to be shared on social media, turning people against the values and the principles of democracies that are so strong. And that slippage over the years, unfortunately, emboldened Putin and made him think that he could get away with this, that he could get away with it in Ukraine. But what a terrible mistake he made in underestimating Ukrainians and underestimating the level to which democracies would stand and do what he never expected us to do, which is push back hard. But I will tell you, it wasn't automatic. There were a lot of places around the world that said, oh, it would be a real shame if Putin were to invade Ukraine. But in the back of their mind, we're thinking, well, we did that with Crimea, and we kicked him out of the G8, made it back to the G7. But other than that, there wasn't a really strong, clear pushback. And I can tell you that there were people wondering if this would be the same. Oh, maybe he'll just take the Donbass. Maybe he'll just come in a little ways. Maybe even if he does come in, it's just Ukraine. We'll try and calm things down a bit. And the thing that convinced the world more than just about anything else was all of you, was Ukrainians themselves, standing with such strength and such courage in the face of this overwhelming adversary, inspiring us all and reminding us all that this is not just a fight for Ukraine. It is a fight for the integrity, the sovereignty, and the capacity of people everywhere to pick the path they want for their future. That is why we are here. It is Ukraine's misfortune that Vladimir Putin chose Ukraine to start this, but it is the world's good fortune that Ukrainians are courageous lions in standing up against him and reminding us what we all need to do. So Canada stands with Ukraine. The world stands with Ukraine. because this is a moment to show that we are willing to fight for the values and the principles we believe in with the best tools at our disposal. The rapid collapse of the Russian economy, the united condemnation and pushback from countries around the world, and the support for Ukraine will continue as long as it takes. Je pourrais en dire bien plus, mais sachez qu'on va être là pour vous soutenir, on va être là pour vous appuyer, on va être là pour le peuple ukrainien aussi longtemps que ça prendra. I'm looking forward to coming around and saying hi to as many of you as I possibly can. So I will cut off my speech here, but just say thank you for your strength. We are with you in your grief and in your courage. Slava Ukraini.
And he's got his mask back on, so I guess that means it's over. Did anyone pick up on what he was saying about slippage, democracy slippage? Let's bring it back. I'm going to bring that, cue it back up, and play that section again. That's the area that really was of major concern to me when I heard what he had to say. Let's let it roll from here.
The pathway that is impressive. Well, that was a direct threat to Vladimir Putin's view of authoritarian and Russian dominance. And we've come to a moment that, quite frankly, we've seen coming over the past years.
Here it is.
We've talked about it in the news, not just about Ukraine, but about democracies around the world, that we see a bit of a slippage in our democracies. Countries turning towards slightly more authoritarian leaders.
Right there. He's beginning to engage in this doublespeak. It's almost like the black arts version of wordsmithing. And he knows that we've all been calling him a tyrant because that's what he is. I've gone so far as to call him a fascist and potentially a Nazi. And I don't say that lightly. He might wear the liberal brand, a big L, and he might have liberal red wrapped around him as his brand, but he doesn't act like a liberal. He acts like a fascist. His response to the truckers' blockade was fascistic. And by saying what he just said there about that right there about slippage in our democracies, he's actually sort of referring to himself without talking about himself, teeing this up. And he's about to engage in some very clever doublespeak. It's very Orwellian. And it turns reality on its head. And it's very dangerous. We need to listen to what he's about to say very carefully, because he's going to, in a roundabout way, in the minds of people who support him and are looking for confirmation of their own bias, he's going to give it to them with this doublespeak. Let me just roll this back just a little bit again. I'll let it roll through that first section and then listen very carefully to what he says and how he says it.
More authoritarian leaders. Countries turning towards slight democracies. In the news, not just about Ukraine, but about democracies around the world, that we see a bit of a slippage in our democracies. Countries turning towards slightly more authoritarian leaders.
here in Canada. That's what we're seeing.
Countries allowing increasing misinformation and disinformation to be shared on social media, turning people against the values and the principles of democracies that are so strong.
Listen to that again.
Social media turning people against,
Listen to that again.
increasing misinformation and disinformation to be shared on social media, turning people against the values and the principles of democracies that are so strong.
So it's misinformation that's the problem. It's not authoritarian, a move toward more authoritarian leaders. The reason that's happening, according to him, is because of misinformation. I guess misinformation on programs like this one, or maybe on Rebel News or Laura Lynn's podcasts. Misinformation. What is misinformation? It's information, I guess, that he deems to be misinformation. Don't lose sight of the fact that there is a censorship bill that is making its way through Parliament. It's all and it died when the last election was called, but it's been reintroduced. And this is what Laura Lynn was referring to. I believe it's Bill C-11. And if it's passed, it will give him the power to shut down independent journalists. Anyone that opposes him. He is an authoritarian. But listen to the way he spins it. He talks about a shift or a slippage in democracy that is resulting in people electing and supporting slightly more authoritarian leaders like him. He doesn't refer to himself as one of those, but he's addressing it because he knows he is one of those authoritarian leaders, tyrants. He is one of those leaders that we've been calling out. He's the main leader that we've been calling out. He's been the most authoritarian, the most tyrannical. It doesn't get any more tyrannical than to invoke the Emergencies or the War Measures Act in response to a protest, not a war. But he spins it and blames what he's been doing on misinformation. And why? Because he's about to become even more tyrannical, even more authoritarian. Because he's about to have a new censorship bill, new censorship legislation passed that will give him the power to crack down on anybody that disagrees with him, China style, old Soviet Union style. Let's go back and let this roll again. Listen to the way he says it. This is doublespeak. It's him saying basically what he said when he invoked the Emergencies Act. I'm doing this to protect democracy and to protect your rights. And the way he did it was by taking all of your rights away. Now he's saying that he's going to protect essentially free speech and protect people's rights and combat this slippage toward more authoritarian leadership by taking even more of your freedoms away. He's going to take away freedom of speech. He's going to impose more censorship through this new legislation. Listen to what he says. Listen to the way he says it.
Countries allowing increasing misinformation and disinformation to be shared on social media, turning people against the values and the principles of democracies that are
turning people against the values of democracy. Misinformation, turning people against.
Information to be shared on social media, turning people against the values and the principles of democracies that are so strong.
We have to protect you from that misinformation. Turning people against with information. Yeah, turning people against you because you are the authoritarian.
Social media turning people against the values and the principles of democracies that are so strong.
Democracy is all about freedom. It's about free speech. You can't have a proper democracy. You can't have real democracy unless people have access to all information so that they can make informed decisions when they go to the ballot box. If they're subjected to a high degree of censorship, if they're not allowed to expose themselves and to absorb a variety of perspectives on issues, and in particular political issues and social issues, if they're not allowed to read things online, if they're only going to be given the government narrative, then how can they possibly make an informed decision when they go to the polls? If Justin Trudeau is censoring all this information and clamping down on anybody that disagrees with him online, if he's allowed to do that, that is what undermines democracy. He's the threat to democracy. His liberal government is the threat to democracy. He is the threat to free speech. You can't have a democracy without free speech. But listen to the way he spins it. This is why we have all of this. We're living in an upside down world right now.
Allowing increasing misinformation and disinformation to be shared on social media, turning people against the values and the principles of democracies that are so strong.
That's what he's doing.
And that slippage over the years, unfortunately, emboldened Putin and made him think that he could get away with this, that he could get away with it in Ukraine. But what a terrible mistake he made.
And then he goes back to Putin, ties it into Putin, as though misinformation here somehow emboldened Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine. What a load of BS. He threw that stuff into the middle of this speech because he has Bill C-11 sitting right there, and it's making its way through Parliament, and he still has enough time to get this thing passed, plenty of time to get it passed, and he will before the next election. This legislation is coming. He's the threat to democracy. He is. And his doublespeak is the misinformation. But how's the saying go? Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals: always accuse your opponent of doing the very thing that you're doing. And that's what Justin Trudeau did in the middle of that speech. It's disturbing. It is petrifying. This man is dangerous. This is why Canada no longer exists. This is why we no longer have Canada. This is why we need to fight to get it back. We're so far along. This is such a huge problem. And so many people buy into this. This is the guy who says he's protecting your rights by taking your rights away. This is the guy who says he's protecting free speech by taking free speech away. And if you're on his side, maybe you think, if you're a liberal and you support him, maybe you think it's a great idea to censor the other side. But that's not democracy, and that's not living in a free society. It's just the opposite. Justin Trudeau is a tyrant. Justin Trudeau is a censorious, authoritarian prime minister. Justin Trudeau is anti-Canada. He does not stand for Canadian values, and he certainly does not stand for democracy. He'll cook the election by controlling information. There's more than one way to fix an election. It doesn't necessarily mean ballot stuffing. the most effective, most powerful way to fix an election is to control the media and control information. And that's what he's been doing by providing massive government handouts to all of the legacy media. And that's what he's now doing with this new censorship legislation that's coming through. And he's on page with this world globalist agenda as it relates to what's going on right now in Ukraine. And he is participating in an effort to control information. That's why RT has been taken off the cable systems in Canada, Russia Today. That's why they're banning information that is coming out of Russia. They're censoring it. So too does Vladimir Putin. But from what I've seen, the censorship on the side of the Canadian government has been the worst. Even as it relates to Ukraine. They want to spin their particular point of view on this conflict. And that is also dangerous because Justin Trudeau is one of the reasons we tonight are on the brink of a nuclear conflict with Russia. He bears some of the responsibility for that because he's not listening. And worse than that now, not only is Justin Trudeau, not only is Joe Biden and other Western leaders, NATO leaders, they're not listening to Vladimir Putin. They're ignoring what he's had to say because they just don't care. And for whatever other agenda they might have. And as a result of that, plus the censorship now, it's preventing dialogue from taking place. Real, genuine, constructive dialogue from happening over there that could lead to a resolution of this. And if they had been listening and had been willing to engage in dialogue much earlier, even going back 8, 10 years, 20, 30 years earlier, this all could have been prevented. What he's doing is disgusting. What he did right there, what I just outlined for you, is disgusting. So much of what he does is doublespeak. It is Orwellian. Let's go to some of the comments and see what you folks have to say about it. Raylex says Canada has been infiltrated. I agree. David Clark says, it is World War III. You always find me in the kitchen at parties. Don't know exactly what you mean by that, but okay. Snooze, you lose. Try harder next time. Be more popular. What else do we have here? Rachel T. could not help herself. I don't know what that means. Start searching facts. You are way behind the 8 ball. Justin is meeting EU. I don't know what that means. What they do in Canada, they use in the rest of the world. Yeah, well, Russia is not worse than us. I think I know what you mean by that. And yeah, I think that people have lost sight of the fact that we're no longer dealing with the old Soviet Union. It is Russia now. And it's not exactly the same system that they had before. People don't quite get what it is over there. It's not democracy like we have here. I don't think, even though they elected Vladimir Putin, I think it's pretty clear that their elections over there are cooked too. But yeah, I don't think Canada's any better than Russia anymore. Not from what I'm seeing now. It used to be a free country. It isn't anymore. Canada is dead. And you're looking at the guy who killed the country. Yes, he's trying to brainwash people, according to Eric. I absolutely agree. That is doublespeak It's all designed to screw with people's minds. The same thing with the pandemic stuff. Stand together by standing apart. It's stuff that doesn't even make sense. If you really look at it, it just doesn't make sense. Listen to what he had to say about that, about misinformation. If you really listen to it, it just doesn't make sense. He's talking about misinformation. And so the end result will be that he wants more censorship. They need to prevent misinformation on the internet. So they need more censorship in order to protect free speech. That defies logic. And when people, that's what they refer to as mass formation psychosis, right? Because they isolate people, they've locked people down, they get people into a mindset where when they're bombarded with these crazy messages that really you can't process, and then if you question them, you're told you're crazy, or that you're unpatriotic, or that you're maybe even a traitor, or that the people who are, and you're told that the people who are questioning it might even be criminals or possibly terrorists, or maybe Nazis, like the Nazi truckers, who need to be held accountable for their misinformation, maybe even thrown in jail. Do you see what a dark path this leads us down? That's why Justin Trudeau is so darn dangerous. That's why he's so darn dangerous. We need to reverse this. And the first thing we need to do is call this stuff out for what it is. That is misinformation. That's Orwellian doublespeak, and it needs to stop. And whenever we hear it, whenever you hear it, it needs to be pointed out. But it's so twisted that it's even hard to explain to people sometimes. After I first heard it, I went to my wife today and I said, if I said to you, and I tried to repeat what he said, but it was so twisted around, I couldn't even quite get it out of I couldn't quite articulate it. I had to go back and listen to it a couple more times in order to explain to her exactly what he had said, because it's so whacked. It's crazy town. But we need to call this stuff out. We need to sweep this stuff up and throw it into the dustbin where it belongs and get back to reality, to a more honest place where honesty has value again. Truth has value again. This is dishonest. He's not being straight with the Canadian people. He's trying to manipulate you. And that's something else that we need to remind ourselves of. The Liberals during the last election, and they've probably been doing this for an even longer period of time, were using psychographic data, polling data, not just a regular kind of a poll, psychographic polls. They were polling people, polling Canadians, using questions that would give them insight into people's mental states, their attitudes, their views on particular things on an emotional level. And then using that psychographic data to craft the kind of language that we just heard from him here. That's why we saw such divisive language coming out during the election, where people who are unvaccinated were dehumanized, where they were used as a scapegoat. Psychographic data, psychographic polling data being used to mess with people's minds. That's what he's doing right there. I guarantee you that little section, and that's only one part of this speech, but that small section right there was rehearsed in advance. He knew exactly what he was going to say. That was not off the cuff. Those words were crafted in advance, memorized, and then recited here in just the way that he intended to in order to mess with your mind. And it is inserted in the middle in a way so it just sort of washes over people. But he will use those words again in the weeks ahead. You mark my words. He will use those phrases again. The media has been playing with people's minds as well. I just pointed out one of the ways that they play with people's minds with reference to the Freedom Convoy, which they now, when they refer to the Freedom Convoy, the legacy media, it's always now the so-called Freedom Convoy. Always. When they refer to the protest, it's no longer a protest, it's an occupation. That was a phrase or a word first used by the politicians and then picked up on by the media, and now they continue to use it, and they have been using it in order to justify the criminal, or not the criminal, but the charges that they decided to lay in order to justify the freezing of the bank accounts and so on. In order to justify the additional use of phrases such as domestic terrorist, insurrection. They're screwing with your mind. That's what he's done. Very dangerous, very dark. He's the tyrant. He's the Nazi. If he acts like a Nazi, supports Nazis, passes legislation that's fascistic, then what is he? Is he a liberal? Judge people by their actions, not by their brand. I'm sorry, Justin. My heart bleeds for you. I pity you. I pray for you. I hope that somewhere inside there's still a little bit of Canadian left in you. That maybe there's still a little bit of love of country. I don't know what's wrong with this man. I don't know what has happened to him. Maybe he's always been like this. I fear that might be the case. But I pray every day that somehow he reaches deep down inside and finds some nugget, some remnant that still allows him to love what Canada is supposed to be. A free, loving, tolerant, open country, a free society, a true democracy where we cherish free speech. I do remember, I think it was during the first election campaign where he was successful and became prime minister. And I think it was right after he was elected. Maybe I'll find the clip for you for another broadcast, but he was asked a tough question from a journalist. And because, of course, he's surrounded by tyrannical people, they all started to heckle the reporter. And he said, wait, no. He said, and maybe you remember this. I think it was a fairly prominent clip at the time. He said, no, he's just doing his job. We have to remember, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he said, conservatives, we have to remember that conservatives are not our enemies. They are our neighbors. At that moment, I thought, maybe he's not such a bad guy. Maybe he will make a pretty good prime minister. He seems to value free speech and open dialogue and civil discourse. I was impressed when he did that. He stuck up for the reporter who asked him a tough question and allowed the reporter to ask the question. But everything is different now. And I don't know why or how that has happened. I don't know what happened to him. I think I do. But it's speculation. All I can say is I see what he's been doing. I see how he's been doing it. And I see everyone else falling in line. premiers across the country. It's sickening. It's disgusting. It's anti-Canadian. It's anti-freedom. And it's Orwellian, and it is dark, and I am afraid of it all. I'm very, very afraid. This is not the Canada I grew up in. And I just don't recognize the country anymore. And I think all of you here tonight, I think you probably see it too. I think you probably see it as well. I have referred to Nazis. I've referred to Chrystia Freeland as being someone who has ties to Ukraine. We showed you that she was standing there supporting a group from Ukraine that is an actual Nazi group. As we pointed out, there are real Nazi groups, and they are powerful within Ukraine. And some of those Nazi groups have been the most effective fighters against the Russians in this conflict. That's just a fact. We showed you a picture of Chrystia Freeland standing in front of and holding a banner for the Banderites, which is one of the neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine. And there's a video that was sent to me, a TikTok video. It's a lot of people have seen this. It's making its rounds. And I'd just like to run this because it does lay out some of the facts and provides more information on Chrystia Freeland's connections to Ukraine and her family's connections to Nazism. I won't run the whole video. The whole video isn't even here and queued up, but I'll run a section of it, and you can probably hunt it down for yourself and watch more of this. And it's concerning, to say the least. So let's let this thing roll, and I hope it sheds a little bit of light on what I've been talking about.
That I've found, as I've said already. All right, now we're going to get into the Liberal MP Chrystia Freeland on Ukraine. This is in 2014. This is before she was Minister of Foreign Affairs. Okay, she has no qualifications to be a Minister of Foreign Affairs. She's being interviewed about the Ukraine. Freeland happens to own, with her sister, an apartment that overlooks the Kyiv Square. She had a front row seat to the Maidan revolution, the Euromaidan crisis. She speaks Ukrainian. She studied in Kyiv during 2 stints back in the late 80s and early 90s. Oh, right when he took command of the Ukraine, and actually, right when her mother was reforming the legal system. So remember, her mother has a direct connection to George Soros because he funded the Ukrainian Legal Foundation, which she founded. Chrystia Freeland's granddad was indeed a Nazi collaborator, we learn. You can pause and read this if you like. There are lots of documents to prove it. Here's some pictures. This is him right here, her grandfather, Michael Chomiak. And this is Emil Gassner, the Nazi administrator in charge of the press, was a quote-unquote journalist. He was one of these people that slipped out. The Polish intelligence services were hunting for Chomiak until the 1980s without knowing that he had fled for refuge to an Alberta farm in Canada that continues to be one of Freeland's real estate assets today. And she's really good buddies, by the way, with George Soros. Chrystia Freeland was going to be George Soros's authorized biographer. Freeland's parliamentary website ran this picture of Soros, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Freeland at a World Economic Forum meeting she arranged in Davos in 2016. That picture is gone. At least I can't find it at the link provided. And here's Chrystia interviewing Soros in 2015. She's interviewed him many, many times. Interestingly, you used to be able to easily call these up on YouTube. It's not so easy anymore. I couldn't find any more. I wanted to get screen grabs from all of them for you, but I didn't feel like hunting all day for them. But they're out there.
You get the idea. And you know, when people today talk about George Soros, it's almost like he's a mythical, imaginary, fictional character, but he's a real dude. He's a real guy. He's a real human. And he is who people say he is. And he is on record as, even as he said that when he was a kid during World War II, he worked with the Nazis to point out Jewish people, finger them. There's an interview with him talking about doing just that. And yes, Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau, they're connected. I find it all very disturbing. And it seems crazy, but those documents that were pointed out in that video, those are articles out of papers like the Ottawa Citizen. These are facts. They might be uncomfortable facts if you're a Liberal supporter, but they're facts. Like I said, if judge people by their actions and not by the brand they wear, Canada has been lost. Rystick 1 says, Trudeau is the real Nazi with Azov connections. They wear swastikas on their uniforms. And that's the other thing Canadians, I don't think, are tuned into. We've been insulated for a long time because we've, by oceans on each side of our great country. And the same thing with the United States. More so in Canada, I think. More insulated. So that today, when you say Nazi, the phrase has been so watered down, so loosely used in political competitions, especially by the left, to characterize conservatives and to smear them, and now being used to smear truckers and freedom fighters, that people no longer really know what it means. Couple that with inadequate teaching of history in our school systems at every level, and it's not surprising that Canadians don't recognize tyrannical behavior, don't understand what they're really facing or dealing with when it's staring them right in the face. Wow. You know, I don't know where it's going to end, but it's still getting worse. Every day I wake up in the morning and I think it can't possibly get much worse than it was yesterday. And then I see things like this new censorship legislation weaving its way through the approval process. And listen to speeches like the one we just heard from the Prime Minister. And every day, things just seem to get worse and worse. Justin Trudeau talks about slippage. Well, we've got it. We've got it, folks. And the slippage is right here. You're looking at it. Gasoline today, $2.19.9. That's $2 and almost 20 cents a liter for gasoline in Montreal today. I don't think that's an accident. And I don't think it's just because of the conflict in Ukraine. Justin Trudeau likes this. The people on the radical left like this. I think people on the radical right, if you want to call it the right, I think they're all on the left, whether they're fascists, communists, hard left socialists, hardline, alarmist environmentalists. I'm not talking about conservationists or people who want to keep the environment clean. I'm talking about the hardliners who don't want us pumping oil, don't want us producing ethical oil in Canada. They like this $2.19 per liter gasoline price. It fits with their agenda. They don't want people driving. Climate change, or so they say. Okay, I think they like it. But in my view, there's no reason for this gasoline to be at $2.19.9. The United States and Canada have massive oil reserves. We're sitting on oil. We're just not being allowed to use it, to utilize it, to pump it. Instead, we keep on importing it from Saudi Arabia. And we were buying it from Russia, but now, oh, well, they say that we're not buying it, aren't we? Or maybe some of that oil will find its way onto the black market and then find its way back into the system anyway. We will have to see. And then Joe Biden, in his State of the Union address, paid lip service to this by saying he was going to release 30 million barrels from the strategic oil reserves in the United States to combat high gas prices. And it's a joke, a smokescreen, more doublespeak, really, because over 20 million barrels of oil is used in the United States alone every single day. So releasing 30 million from the U.S. Strategic Oil Reserve only gets you a little over a day's worth of oil. That's barely a drop in the bucket. That won't provide any real relief at the pumps, won't solve any real problems. Why are we paying these kinds of prices? Why? We have the energy right here. We never should have been dependent on imports. We shouldn't be dependent on imports. It's more environmentally friendly to produce it here rather than have it pumped out of the ground in the Middle East and then shipped across the ocean. Why have our politicians left us vulnerable like this? Why have they put us in a position where we have to pay $2.19.9 a liter for gasoline? Why? Affordable energy benefits the entire country. It puts the entire country into a stronger position economically. It benefits the middle class. It benefits the poor. It makes us all prosperous. It makes for a stronger, more prosperous country. What's wrong with that? And if we're a stronger, more prosperous country, we can help people in less prosperous countries more effectively. We can provide aid to them more effectively because we're prosperous. And there's a whole lot of poverty to be solved right here at home anyway. I don't believe that price is an accident. Not after everything we've seen with this pandemic, not after the way we've seen government crack down on small businesses, hammer the economy, hammer the middle class, not after the way we've seen them treat the truckers, not after the attitude, the snobbery that they've directed at the working class. Their snobbery has been on full display. These elites, these globalists, one world government, where they're bringing us all down instead of raising us all up. I would say that everyone here watching tonight is probably awake, but we're not woke. And we need to wake up more people, especially those who are woke. Our future depends on it. The future for our kids and our grandkids depends on it. It's critical. And all that doublespeak that I just pointed out from Justin Trudeau, all of this Orwellian language. And if you don't know what I mean by Orwellian language, and my guess is the vast majority of you out there watching do understand, because I think that we have a very educated audience here. As I go through these comments every night, I can see that I'm surrounded by intelligent, informed people. I really believe that. And but we need to with information. This is an information war. And I guess I'll take this opportunity then to remind you again that we need your help here. We can't fight that information war alone. There are costs associated with getting these broadcasts on the air and online, and even getting the new Rumble channel up and running. That there were costs associated with that, and we're on there for the first time tonight. You can support us by going to freedomreporters.com and donating, or you can click the hot link direct to the donation page in the description on the YouTube channel, on the Rumble channel, and on our Facebook platforms. We need your help. And when I say we're in an information war, I mean that. It's even this war in Ukraine. It's an information war as much as anything else, as we've seen with the propaganda flowing from both sides, and now the censorship on both sides, because Putin has imposed his own censorship over there and has threatened to take legal action and imprison journalists who engage in fake news against his soldiers or his military. And as a result, we've seen the major U.S. or Western news outlets like CNN, Bloomberg, others, they're suspending their operations in Russia. Probably wise, because I'm certain that they are engaging in misinformation, propaganda. And I'm certain that a lot of what they are reporting over there and over here, they would be unable to back up with facts. And that is why we all need to be very careful about the information we're consuming. And that is why we need to question everything. But it's also why we need to make sure that we have access to all kinds of information. As I said, it's critical to a true democracy and to a free and open society. Without free speech, without a free media, democracy is lost. And I would suggest to you that a free media does not include a state-funded, state-controlled media. That's not a free media. That's a captured media. The CBC, CTV, Global, National Post, you go down the list. None of those media outlets are truly free anymore. We don't have a free press. Not when it comes to the legacy media. They've all been bought and paid for, every single one of them. They have all been compromised. They have all been, and here's the right phrase, the right term, they've all been captured. Captured by Justin Trudeau and his tyrannical government. Tyrannical, extreme, left-wing, socialists, I would say fascists. I, for a long time, had a hard time understanding exactly what was going on. And I'm not saying that I even fully understand everything now, because things are fluid. But I thought we were dealing with a new form of communism, or just communism or Marxism. Cultural Marxism is what I thought was really going on for a long time. But now I realize what we really have is a new form of fascio-communism or fascistic communism. A hybrid. And it is global in focus. And that is why we see governments around the world falling into line. They're all in lockstep. Every single one of them. All trying to build back better. It scares me when I hear that phrase used over and over again. And you notice they've kind of backed off on it a bit, but they were all using it, and they still do. And Justin Trudeau even sort of alluded to it and used it in that speech to those people from the Ukrainian community in Etobicoke that we just ran for you. Build back better. Does it feel like things have been built back better to anybody out there? Anybody? Does it feel like things are better when gasoline in Montreal is $2.19.9 per liter? Doesn't feel better to me. Doesn't feel better to me at all. Diesel fuel is also up. And yes, Pamela, I agree. Slaves will pay. And not because not only are we looking at a censorship bill, we're also looking at the implementation, and it's real. We showed you the documentation of a universal basic income for Canada. And make no mistake, if you accept that, if that's approved and everyone is put on universal basic income, you will become a slave to the system, a slave to the government. Rachel says, we are paying for Trudeau's gas. I suppose that is true. £1.55, I guess, per liter in UK. Yeah. I think the pound is almost equivalent to the dollar. It's close, I think. $2.31 a liter in Netherlands. And the pound has more value than the dollar. Okay. Yeah. Yes, and the Grant Daniels Band says, of course, they love to keep us off the roads and under control. I agree. I think it's true. I love cars. And I remember when I was a kid, 16 years old, couldn't wait to get my driver's license. Getting my first bicycle was like a form of freedom. It was freedom. Getting a car, that provides freedom because it gives you mobility. You can go where you want, when you want. Government never tracked you. Get in your car and go for a drive. Want to go right across the country? Go ahead. Nothing to stop you. And I was thinking back today, not so very long ago, just to head over to the United States. What did you have to do? Show your driver's license. That was it. It was the world's longest undefended border. Our two countries were such great friends that we could pass over the border in minutes. Just check in at the border stop, show your driver's license, and away you go. Then 9/11 came. The Patriot Act. Sounded like a great thing. Well, who isn't patriotic? The Patriot Act. More Orwellian doublespeak. Give something a title or a name that is the opposite of what it really is, right? So then we had to start showing our passports, and there were more restrictions at the border. And it became more difficult. And then strip searching at airports. Okay, we need security. I get it. But boy, nothing was the same after 9/11. And it's continued. This crackdown has continued. This assault on our liberties. The Patriot Act. We all know it's been used to spy on ordinary citizens. A massive assault on our freedoms and our rights in the United States. And in Canada, we never had rights to the same degree to begin with. And now the rights that we did have are essentially gone. And we know that the government has been spying on us digitally already. And it feels like to some people like we've made this gain by having some of the provinces start to lift the mandate on the vaccine passports. So in Ontario, for instance, it'll be gone. I guess, well, it's gone now, and the mask mandates will be gone hopefully by the end of the month. And people think we've gained a lot. But it's all smoke and mirrors, because Ontario is still getting ready to roll out a complete digital ID program, which we showed you on the program the other night. So they kind of take 2 miles and give you 2 inches back, and people go, oh, that's so much better. Oh, see, what are you upset about? You haven't lost any of your rights, they say. What rights have you lost? There aren't any mandates anymore. Well, only the digital ID system. So yeah, they keep taking more and more and more and more from us, don't they? Yes, they do. It's disturbing. It petrifies me. I want to take you back and just rerun something from Donald Trump. This was when Donald Trump met with Ukraine's prime minister. This is an old clip, but I want you to listen to what he had to say back at that time when he was still the president. And I think it gives us all another interesting perspective that we need to remember now that we're facing this terrible situation in Ukraine with the Russians.
Do more on Joe Biden and investigate.
No, I want him to do whatever he can. This was not his fault. He wasn't there. He's just been here recently. But whatever he can do in terms of corruption, because the corruption's massive. Now, when Biden's son walks away with millions of dollars from Ukraine and he knows nothing, and they're paying him millions of dollars, that's corruption. When Biden's son walks out of China with $1.5 billion in a fund, and the biggest funds in the world can't get money out of China, and he's there for one quick meeting and he flies in on Air Force Two. I think that's a horrible thing. I think it's a horrible thing, but I'm going far beyond that. I know the president, and I've read a lot about Ukraine. I've read a lot about a lot of countries. He wants to stop corruption. He was elected, I think, number one on the basis of stopping corruption, which unfortunately has plagued Ukraine. And if he could do that, he's doing really the whole world a big favor. I know, and I think he's going to be successful.
Mr. President, on Rudy Giuliani, why do you think it's appropriate for your personal attorney to get involved in government business?
Well, you'd have to ask Rudy. I will tell you this, that Rudy's looking to also find out where the phony witch hunt started, how it started. You had a Russian witch hunt that turned out to be 2.5 years of phony nonsense. And Rudy Giuliani's a great lawyer. He was a great mayor. He's highly respected. I've watched the passion that he's had on television over the last few days. I think it's incredible the way he's done. What he's out is he wants to find out, where did this Russian witch hunt that you people really helped perpetrate, Where did it start? How come it started? It was all nonsense. It was a hoax. It was a total hoax. It was a media hoax and a Democrat hoax. Where did it start? And Rudy's got every right to go and find out where that started. And other people are looking at that too. Where did it start? The enablers. Where did it all come from? It was out of thin air. And I think he's got a very strong right to do it. He's a good lawyer. He knows exactly what he's doing. And it's very important.
Mr. President, do you believe that these emails from Hillary Clinton, do you believe that they're in Ukraine? Do you think this whole thing?
I think they could be. You mean the 30,000 that she deleted?
Yes.
Yeah, I think they could very well. Boy, that was a nice question. I like that question. Because frankly, I think that one of the great crimes committed is Hillary Clinton deleting 33,000 emails after Congress sends her a subpoena. Think of that. You can't even do that in a civil case. You can't get rid of evidence like that. She deleted 33,000 emails after, not before, after receiving the subpoena from the U.S. Congress. I mean, I've never heard. Now, she's done far worse than that, although I don't know how much worse it can be. But there were many other things she did that were wrong. But that's so obvious. She gets a subpoena from the United States Congress, and she deletes them. And then she said, as I remember it, that, oh, well, they had to do with the wedding and yoga. She does a lot of yoga, right? So they had 33,000 emails about the wedding of her daughter and yoga. I don't think so. How she got away with that one is just, but it's one of many. And it's corrupt government, because we have corruption also, Mr. President. We have a lot of corruption in our government. And when you see what happened with Hillary Clinton, when you see what happened with Comey and McCabe and all of these people, we have a lot of things going on here too. Hopefully it's going to be found out very soon. But I think that a lot of progress has been made. A lot of progress has been made.
So that gives you a, reminds you of kind of what was going on back then. And I think it's, it's pretty interesting because he refers to the corruption that we've talked about here. And we know that Ukraine has been a very corrupt country. A lot of Western politicians, especially the Bidens, have business interests in Ukraine. And it's pretty clear, I think, that some of those details they don't want the public to become too aware of. The media has been running cover for the Bidens since the last election, and probably long before that. I don't know. It's huge double standard all the time, right? Speaking of double standards, this is what we saw on Parliament Hill. This weekend, when pro-lockdown demonstrators went to stage a sort of counter demonstration to people who went up to Ottawa again this past weekend, or again yesterday, to demonstrate, to show their support for the People's Convoy rolling across the U.S. and to rekindle the energy that was there during the Freedom Convoy protest that lasted for over 3 weeks. And what are we seeing here? Well, this is the Terry Fox statue monument that the people opposed to the convoy said had been desecrated by the truckers because they draped a Canadian flag over it. They put a Canadian flag on Terry. And a couple of signs calling for freedom. And they said, "You don't get to touch Terry Fox ever," is what they said. Well, here they are, and I guess they get to touch Terry Fox, and no one gets upset about this. But doesn't it seem like a bit of a double standard? Why do they get to put their signs on Terry Fox? Nobody gets upset. But if it's the other way around, there's hell to pay. Anybody have thoughts on that? Just checking the comments to see if any. I have to scroll right down. A lot of people watching tonight, and I really appreciate the support. Might take some time. We've got so many comments coming in that it might take a little bit of time for the comments about the Terry Fox statue to populate. Oh, here's Toby Stewart. He says, yes, it is a double standard, Rick. Thank you, Toby. Deb Wirt says, yes, they even carried communist flags. I did see that, yes. The one sign says life before liberty. Dawn says she's not sure what it says, Rick. The one sign says life before liberty. The other one says Terry Fox was high risk. And the one right by his front leg says, my mom's cancer made it to her lungs too. Go home, traitor or traitors. So that's what the signs say. Sind says, I hope everyone here knows that Trudeau is the poster boy for the WEF, World Economic Forum. They are seeking to control everyone through your money. How about if we not pay Trudeau's wages? I hear what you're saying. I don't know how you make that happen. Claire says, not right what they're doing with the statue, that's for sure. Robert says, is your Canadian flag racist yet? Old Glory is. Yeah, I think that's a valid point, and I've said this for a long time. The people who have been tearing down our statues, the people who have been attacking things that they say are racist, the people who have been attacking Canadian history, it isn't just a statue of Sir John A. Macdonald that they want gone. They want the Canadian flag gone. Those people hate the country. They hate our history. And all they see in the history is the negative aspect of it, the bad stuff. They don't acknowledge that every country has had dark periods, challenges. But in Canada and the United States, those challenges over time have been overcome. And things still aren't perfect, but we continue to work at it and improve our country. That's what has made the country so great. But for those who don't see any of the positive aspects and can only focus on the negative stuff, yes, I think they believe that the Canadian flag is racist and they want it gone. They want to burn it all down. They want the whole country gone. And I think Justin Trudeau is among them. That's why he made sure that our flag was flown at half staff for months. Because that was an attempt to make sure the Canadians felt ashamed of their country. When it was his father and a Liberal government that caused the problem with the residential schools to begin with. The problem, I don't think, has really been the people of Canada so much. It's been bad governments. And the majority of those bad governments have been bad Liberal governments. Mark Plant says they're wearing masks outside, so it's okay. Valid point, Mark. Appreciate that comment. Canadian communist flags flying, Union flags flying to, I don't know what that means. I saw Rick Hansen doing his tour when I was at Western. Yeah, I remember when Rick Hansen rolled through too. I covered Rick Hansen as a reporter for CTV back in the day. I traveled some of the route through Southern Ontario with him. And those were the days. Those were the days when people still had Canadian pride. That's when the country still filled people's hearts with joy. That's when Canada was still respected around the world. What's happened since then? What's happened to Canada since then? Are we still respected? I don't think Justin Trudeau is respected. I think he's seen as a puppet and as sort of a half incompetent boy in spite of his age. I don't think he's taken seriously on the world stage. And as a consequence, I think Canada's standing in the world is at an all-time low. Tristan says, God bless you for your works in this time of deceptions and suppression of the truth, for the children being harmed by these people. In Jesus' name, amen. Jesus is Lord and Savior. Thank you, Tristan. I appreciate that very much. As I said just last night, the messages that I've been getting, the phone calls, the email messages, the comments on here every night, so many of them so positive and supportive, and it really does fill my heart with hope. In spite of the fact that I think the country has been lost, I still believe that it can come back because I see so many people determined to keep it alive, and we just don't want to let it die. Yeah, that's the Gordesm says, Rick, you ever watch They Live? That's the movie with Roddy Piper. I watched it years ago. I know exactly what you're talking about. Some people say that movie, science fiction flick, he walks around and he puts sunglasses on and he can see that we've been invaded by aliens, country taken over, that it's not so much a science fiction flick, that it's actually more of a documentary. So I would encourage everyone to watch that. I need to rewatch it to refamiliarize myself with the details in it. It was a long time ago when I watched that. I met Roddy Piper. Super nice guy, by the way. Great guy. Smart. Wrestler, actor, and a pretty cool movie. Toby says, just like the locals complaining of the truckers and the rest of us Canadians, Parliament belongs to all Canadians. Yes, it does. And we have to remember that those politicians are supposed to work for the people. Somehow, we've lost control of our politicians, and they're controlling us. Everything is upside down, and we need to find a way to get it back. Abracabat says, give me liberty or give me death. And yes, I agree with that. I don't think the country is worth living in. I don't want to be part of it if it isn't a free country. This is my worst nightmare. Seeing our freedom taken away. As I've said before, right here on this program, even as a kid, my worst nightmare, my greatest fear was having the country taken over by a communist regime. I don't understand. I don't know why. As a kid, I was so focused even on politics back then that was my greatest fear. And now it seems like we're living that out. But as I say, it's not just a communist or a Marxist thing that has infiltrated our system, our country. It seems to be this new hybrid fascio-communist system. And I think it's already happened. Trump is the real deal, solid patriots. So the comments keep coming in. And again, I really appreciate everything I appreciate these comments from everyone tonight. There's another story that I'd like to draw your attention to tonight as well. And I think this story was broken by the Epoch Times, and the information is coming out through other media outlets now as well. And I think it's important to touch on it because this involves the lockdowns in Quebec. And the story is, oh, we've lost the, I lost the full story. But the story is that Quebec email between government officials revealed that there was no scientific basis for the curfew, prompting the calls for probes into COVID-19 measures across Canada. And what that really showed was, and maybe I can pull this back up. I need to, let me see if I can get the whole article up here again. Now it's going to take me a minute. The point is, before the Quebec government implemented another round of lockdowns, they went to their public health officials and they asked for scientific evidence and data that would show that they are effective, and they could not produce it because they said they didn't have it. And they also said that they didn't really have time to do any kind of a study to prove that, I'm sorry, not lockdowns, but curfews. We're talking about curfews in Quebec. And in Quebec, the pandemic measures were among the strictest in Canada, if not the strictest. And they asked for data. Public health could not provide it. And now there are emails confirming that. It shows that public health had no scientific evidence at all to justify the imposition again of curfews in Quebec and across Canada and many of these other mandates. So that story has broken. And yet, even though they didn't have any scientific basis, no proof, no studies to point to, they just went ahead and did it anyway. Where's the science behind that? So this is something that needs to be explored to a greater degree. And not every province implemented curfews, but Quebec, the premier there, decided to go ahead and impose a curfew on people again anyway, with no scientific evidence to show that it would have any efficacy in terms of preventing the spread of the virus. And he imposed the curfew from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. every night. And then that gentleman who emailed and told me that I didn't understand the meaning of martial law, that's pretty authoritarian. You can't leave your house between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. That's a form of martial law. That's Canada. We're supposed to be a free country. And you can't justify it. You can't point to the science. We'll have to see where that story goes as things unfold over time. I'm telling you, man, the country, it's lost. When, in any time in previous history, when has that ever been done in Canada before? Ever. And how do you justify that? Julie Waters says they've been trying to remove our statues for years. They're trying to erase our history because their history is so racist. Ristic One says, yes, Jack Layton was the real deal. Well, I wish that we had some of our old leaders back. I really do. The NDP is not the NDP that we used to have. The NDP used to represent working class people. It was a party that drew most of its support from labor unions. Today, they have nothing but contempt for the working class. Jagmeet Singh is an elitist. They've abandoned their base. They have a new base, and it's not based in labor. Truckers that used to support the NDP aren't there anymore. I'm not sure what the next election will bring, but I think we're going to see some very strange, very unusual voting patterns, unprecedented voting patterns develop in the next election. I don't think these parties the next time around will be able to take their support for granted to the same degree. I don't know. People do tend to vote for brands, the same way they go to Walmart and shop for products off the end caps. People are easily led through marketing and suggestion. That's why when you go to the big box stores, the products that they really want you to buy, they really want to promote, they put them on the end caps or in the center aisles. And those manufacturers, the companies that have those products, they pay a premium price to have that placement. And they set up big displays there. And what that does is when people walk in, that says to telegraphs a message, this is the product you're supposed to buy. And it's always brand name items usually, unless it's the store promoting their own stuff, but it's generally brand name stuff. So you combine the marketing with the product placed in just the right spot, smack dab in front of somebody's face. It's like buying impulse items at the cash register. You buy your Snickers bar when you're cashing out, but the end caps, it's the same thing with politics. People buy Coca-Cola because it's a brand. They vote liberal because it's a brand. But I'm asking everybody, think more when you go to the polls the next time. Judge these politicians by their actions. Think it through. Make a wise choice. Don't just vote for the brand. Yeah, Ms. Jensky says, Rick Walker, globalists want all countries to collapse. It certainly does appear that way, doesn't it? And that's why I agree with you, especially in this way. That $2.19.9 per liter they're paying in Montreal, again, I don't think that's an accident. What they're doing is they're blaming the high price on the conflict in Ukraine. Because for them, they don't want to let a crisis go to waste. They want us paying over $2 a liter. They want that. They don't want us out there driving around being free people. They want to take your car away. And if you do have a car, they want you in an electric car. Why? I think there are a bunch of reasons. One of the main reasons is an electric car that goes digital. They can track. They'll know your every move, every single movement, everywhere you go. And I think that it also redirects the money to certain groups of people and away from other groups of people. There's more to the whole electric car thing, and they're not as green as people think they are. That's for sure. In fact, they may be less green, but that's a subject for another day. Some guy took a blank sign down there today. I like that. I didn't see that. I don't know what that means. Protest these nuts. I don't know what that means either. Can't go into Apple Store without mask security guard in front of door. Yeah, well, I don't really care for Apple products. It's a personal thing. Terry Fox had cancer and ran to raise money and awareness. Yes, he did. And I agree that he's a national hero and probably one of the greatest Canadians ever. But I think Terry Fox belongs to all Canadians, and he's been appropriated by the left, the far left, or they're trying to anyway. And what that whole thing surrounding that monument was, it was like, if you're a trucker and working class, if you're a conservative, if you believe in the freedom movement, you don't get to touch Terry Fox. Only the people on the left, socialists, or the fascists, or whatever group it is that is opposed to the people on the other side, whoever they are, whatever they are. They can do whatever they want. They can put signs on Terry Fox. I think Terry Fox belongs, and his legacy belongs to all Canadians, because I don't think Terry Fox was political. Everyone wants a cure for cancer. But I'll tell you this, Joe Biden speaking about curing cancer in his State of the Union address, that's not going to get us there. I think there are some great scientists and researchers out there who are doing great work, and they may get us there. But if they do, it won't be because of Joe Biden. Julie Waters says the U.S. certainly isn't. I don't blame people for their hatred toward the U.S. We are run by the chest pounders at the industrial military complex. Yeah, Canada, strange country. It's like it's Americanized, but Canadians don't want to be Americans. And I see a really heavy anti-American flavor and attitude in the country these days, and it's been that way for a long time. I don't subscribe to it. I don't like it. I love the United States. I truly do. I don't like a lot of the things U.S. governments and past presidents have done, and I don't like what the current president is doing at all, especially when it comes to wars in foreign countries like Syria, Libya, Yemen. I don't like what I see going on in Ukraine at all, and I don't think it had to happen. Relic says Terry Fox is a Canadian hero. No question about it. No doubt. And not only that, he's not just a Canadian hero. What was I going to say? Just as I mentioned, he's just a figure that it's not liberal, not conservative. He was out there for Canada, and he was fighting to try to find a cure, to help people get to a cure. Karen says, we are here, Rick. We will fight. I appreciate that. You know, sitting here in this chair, I know that I've painted a big target on myself, and I've already endured some of what I knew would be coming, and I think that there's going to be more coming this way for sure. But we're ready. And just doing what we're doing, even just reading all these comments tonight, having this back and forth with you guys tonight, this is one of the key things we need to do to preserve democracy and freedom, is to have open dialogue and explore ideas and to have discussion. And if we can't do that, then democracy truly is dead for good. That's why Justin Trudeau and his censorship bill has to be challenged and hopefully defeated. We need to make sure that people continue to have a voice. That's what we're here trying to do, is provide a voice for everyone. Blood. Don't know what that means, but there's a whole lot of blood being spilled unnecessarily in Ukraine, that's for sure. Plandemic, says Paulette. I understand. Satanic fascist Marxist system started in 2001, September 11th. You know, when I hear people refer to Satanism and make satanic references in regard to, you know, the World Economic Forum and globalism, I understand it. But a lot of people don't, especially in a secular society where a lot of people don't believe in God anymore. So when you start talking about how a particular political group might be satanic or evil, they have a hard time understanding. And for them, it's something mystical, right? Even a reference to God is something mystical. But there's more to it than that. And what they don't understand is that the references to God in the Constitution refer to everyone, and not just on a religious plane. Referring to our rights coming from God is really a reference to just our rights coming from a higher place, not from government. And so, yeah, I think a lot of what we see going on right now is truly evil. I don't think there's any question about it. Whether is it satanic? I think there are satanic elements to it for sure, 100%. And some of the people engaged in these anti-Canadian, anti-American, globalist efforts, yeah, I think that I think they do subscribe to the dark side of life, if you will. But I think a lot of people don't understand when you say that, and when you talk about God, or you talk about things in this way, when you say satanic fascist Marxist system, I think that's when they say, oh, they're crazy. They're crazy. But it's not that you're crazy at all. It's that your beliefs are rooted in your values and your convictions. So I totally get it. I absolutely understand. I'm with you. I'm with you. Absolutely with you. Rachel says, if you have taken an injection, please don't take any more. More information about those Pfizer documents coming out in the next few days. We'll have to take you off this channel, put you over onto the Rumble channel, but we'll be doing it over there where we can speak more openly. We're not doing it tonight because that Rumble channel is brand new. We want to make sure everything is functioning properly over there. So this is our first live stream to Rumble. Jesus wins, checkmate. It's interesting, you know, Rachel, because throughout this pandemic, I've seen so many people find a connection spiritually, or a connection to religion, because of the way the government has been treating people. It's brought many people to religion that I'm certain would never have found their way before. And I must confess, I'm not the most religious person, but over the last number of years, I've come to appreciate religion, and I've come to it in my own way. And especially over the past 2 years. And I've come to understand more about why people would always refer to, like, the Soviet Union or Marxist or communist countries as godless. And it's been very interesting to see people find their way to God, if you will, or to church, religion. And what I've come to realize is it is not a mystical thing so much or exclusively. religion is in itself a sort of philosophy. And there's a lot of wisdom in the Bible. And whether you're religious or not, there's a lot of wisdom in that book. And that can help guide us out of this disaster. And I think a lot of you out there tonight probably understand what I'm saying. J-Boy says Jagmeet Singh has finished the NDP, voting for the Emergency Act reluctantly. What an outrage. I agree. Never should have passed in Parliament. Never should have been invoked to begin with. Didn't even come close to meeting the threshold to justify its invocation. Chris says race is under color of law by groups grouping people, has nothing to do with heritage. In best interests of Canadians, the government will vote for you. I don't know what that means. Yeah, a lot of trolls on here tonight, that's for sure. That's okay. It means we're over the target. Absolutely over the target. Just checking here to see what's going on with our live feeds out of the People's Convoy, because we're getting near the end of the evening and I want to make sure that we aren't missing anything. And I also want to check in just briefly on our feeds coming out of Ukraine. So I know that Ukrainian leader Zelensky says sanctions have not been sufficient, are not sufficient. He's calling for more intervention. And the Ukrainian call for the no-fly zone renewed, but still getting no support. It's pretty clear that the NATO countries supporting Ukraine against the Russian invasion are probably not going to send in soldiers, but it looks like NATO countries supporting Ukraine have a green light now to send fighter jets as part of their military aid. That coming from the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The push for more air support apparently comes as Russia hit a string of southern cities in Ukraine, and that prompted more evacuation efforts. Ukraine's military, I think, pretty much their entire Air Force was devastated, blown away in the first day or day and a half by the Russian military in their first bombing raids. So I guess it depends on your particular point of view with regard to all of this, but I would say this is an area of concern, an absolute area for concern. This will escalate things more. If fighter jets are provided, I don't think Putin he's not going to like that. And I don't know, maybe you're not sending your pilots, but you're sending your jets. Does that constitute third-party involvement? If you're providing the weapons, if you're providing the hardware, we saw in Hungary that they would not allow the flow of weapons through their country to get into Ukraine because of that exact reason. This is a very difficult situation. So we'll have to see. And I think that the government encouraging Canadian citizens, civilians, encouraging them to go over to Ukraine to fight is irresponsible. I think it's just going to lead to more bloodshed. And you're sending people over there who are ill prepared for what they're really going to face. Don't have proper training. This whole thing is a mess, folks. It's an absolute disaster. You talk about a humanitarian disaster. What could be worse than encouraging someone who doesn't have proper training, or cheerleading for someone or for people who have no proper military training to get on a plane and go over to another country to fight in a war where they will be viewed by their adversary as a mercenary. And if captured or confronted, they'll be killed or imprisoned. In a battle that I honestly don't think can be won by the Ukrainians, because regardless of the propaganda that we're getting, they're severely outgunned. And by the time they get the planes over there, if they get planes over there, it may be over. We'll see. That might not be popular. That might not be the message you're getting from the legacy media, but I think that is the truth. And that's the truth. Free people and limited government. That is the answer. Soft Southern night. I agree. 100%. If you can support us, please do by making a donation at freedomreporters.com. We need your help. Absolutely need your help. We're talking a little bit about truth here, and truth is an elusive term that's hard to define. But our mission here is to help people try to get to the truth by providing more perspective and more information, and where possible, live feeds, unedited video, uncensored material, and a perspective that you're just not getting in other places. This is a new form of journalism, and we are on the front lines of the information war. Please, if you can, support us. I'm flying solo tonight, but we do have other people here working hard here and behind the scenes, and it takes a lot to put this together. It takes time, research. We've had a number of people digging up documents over the last couple of weeks. We've got the Pfizer documents and a whole tranche of other documents that were released with regard to a whole bunch of interesting, well, just a bunch of events that have highlighted the news over the last couple of years. New documents that we're going to be going through, and I don't know where they're going to lead, but we need time to go through all of that stuff too, and we'll be sharing all of that with you. And even in the short time that we've had this news channel resurrected, we have brought you stories that you just haven't seen anyplace else, including that story about the so-called, I'll use that phrase myself this time, the so-called domestic terrorist that they focused on to justify the invocation of the Emergencies Act, from what I understand. And I think the use of the phrase so-called as a prefix to the term domestic terrorist is justifiable in this case. Because if you go back and find that previous episode where we laid all of that out, that story was mind-blowing. And it's hard to believe that the mainstream media that reported on it fell for it. And it's hard to believe that the government, any government officials, took it seriously. And I think it's a darn good thing that the senators were alerted to the story before they voted on whether to extend the Emergencies Act. So we brought you that story. It wasn't exclusively from us originally, but we found out about it because of the person they were accusing of being the domestic terrorist. It's a complicated story, and I can't get into it all here tonight, but it is on a previous episode. So go and check that out. And I think it'll blow your mind. But again, to do more of that kind of work, and we have a lot of other work to do, you can support us at freedomreporters.com. That's freedomreporters.com. There is a hot link in the YouTube and Facebook descriptions, as well as on Rumble, where we are live tonight for the very first time. And we are getting viewers from all over the world watching us now. Tens and tens of thousands of people watching this broadcast now. And that also fills my heart with hope every night. And the audience has been growing. And you can help us also just by subscribing to our channels. That helps us immensely, because the more likes, shares, and subscribes that we get, the more it improves the algorithm. And if you ring the bell, click that bell on YouTube, that also makes sure that you get notified whenever we publish new video content. And we've been on here every night live at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So more developments. It looks like the situation in Ukraine will be escalating in the days ahead. And we're going to keep tabs on the People's Convoy as well. Very concerned about what's going to happen in Ukraine, especially if the U.S. is going to send fighter jets over there and train pilots so that they can fly them. Very concerned about what the reaction from Russia might be. Every day that results in more escalation puts us that much closer to a possible nuclear conflict, and we need to avoid that at all costs. We cannot allow that to happen, no matter what. If they unleash nuclear weapons, if the United States, if the West, NATO, and Russia square off in a nuclear conflict, it will be a global disaster. The world will never be the same again. It will be devastating for the environment. If you care about the environment, we cannot allow that to happen. And we will be checking in on that People's Convoy in the days ahead. We'll be back checking on it tomorrow. I don't know how effective just driving around in circles is going to be. We'll find out. We'll find out. Any last comments from anybody of real note here before we sign off tonight? Almost time. Relic says, yes, reckless. I think maybe he's referring to put may flatten ground troops with baby nuke. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think if he goes nuclear, it goes to the U.S., to strategic locations. And a nuclear conflict, Putin has the upper hand. He has better technology, better defensive technology, able to shoot down incoming ICBMs, technology the United States does not have, and people don't realize. And I'm very scared because today, I don't think that the same level of fear is there that was present in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's diminished. And I think it's because today's generation has not been educated as to the horrors of nuclear weapons. And I think we've been living with them for so long under the shadow of nuclear weapons that people have sort of just become used to it. And we're all taking everything for granted right now. Again, the same way we did freedom. We're taking the state of things right now for granted, thinking that there's no way a nuclear war could happen. I believe that it could. And I think we're closer to that right now than we have ever been before. And I don't mean to scare people, but you should be looking at this very carefully and preparing yourselves in whatever way you can. in whatever way you can. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I am wrong. I hope I'm wrong. Folks, with that, I'm going to sign off for the night. I'll be back tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on the Maverick News Channel. I thank everyone for joining us tonight. Stay safe, love each other, and pray. Hope. I'm Rick Walker. This is the Maverick News Channel. For the Freedom Reporters, reminding you, we are the antivirus program for your mind. Catch you tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you, everyone, for watching.